Starting out life on the Sega Saturn, Guardian Heroes would go on to earn a reputation for its fantastic sprite work and gameplay that helped cement it as one of the Saturn's crown jewels. Not many people know, however, that a port eventually released on the Game Boy Advance, and whilst it's nowhere near as good as the original, it still manages to maintain many of the core aspects that made it so good. For the most part, it's a traditional side-scrolling beat-em-up like Turtles in Time or Streets of Rage, but one of the things that make it special is that it's also technically an RPG. You can earn experience points from defeating enemies, and then use it to upgrade various stats like your speed, attack power, or magic defense. I really loved how raising your speed stat actually visibly increased your movement on the screen. When you start out, you move at a slow walk and attack very slowly, but once you max it out, you virtually got super speed. Now there's lots of different spells and attacks in the game, from lightning bolts to Kamehameha blasts made of fire. The combat is really engaging, and there's always many enemies flying about, bouncing off your brutal attacks. To add to this, you can glide through the air if you tap jump, and you can counter absolutely any attack no matter how powerful. This really comes into play during several of the more impressive boss fights throughout the game. When it comes to visuals, Guardian Heroes is really impressive for the Game Boy Advance. Of course, it doesn't feature the same amount of detail compared to the Saturn version, but it manages to hold up pretty well and keep the action flowing. Although not the best beat 'em up on the system by any means, it's still one that's worth checking out. Saber Wolf is a somewhat sequel to an incredibly old game that appeared on a Commodore 64. It sees you taking on the role of Saberman as you set out to retrieve a multitude of treasures from the ever-elusive wolf. The game itself is fairly simple and easy to grasp. It's basically a side-scrolling platformer that presents a variety of puzzles throughout its runtime, which helps it stand out amongst a range of similar experiences available on the GBA. Now, the entire adventure is split up into two sections. You have the overworld map, which is presented in a sort of isometric 3D fashion, which acts as a sort of hub area. Here you must search the landscape for conspicuously placed holes, which act as a portal to the platforming stages. And it's here where the game truly comes into its own, and offers up some really compelling gameplay. The closest thing to compare it to would be something like Donkey Kong Country, but the game adds another element in the form of speed. The faster you get past all of the obstacles and reach the treasure, the better it will be. If you take too much time, and the gold bar, skulls, strange contraption will become silver, then bronze. The better the treasure, the higher the exchange rate at shops for ordinary coins. Visually, Saber Wolf is stunning on the Game Boy Advance. There's lighting effects, sprite manipulation, and many other technical aspects that make it one of the best looking games on the handheld. It's nice to see just how powerful the GBA could be when in the hands of the right developer. Overall, Saber Wolf is well worth giving a go if you're looking for a new platformer to jump into on the Game Boy Advance. Car Battler Joe is a unique blend of an RPG and a racing game. You play as a boy named Joe, or whatever you choose to name him, whose father was a legend at the sport of car racing. Now you're old enough to get your own car and start battling on your own. When you play as Joe, the game is a typical RPG from a sort of top-down point of view. You talk to people, you buy things, and you edit the parts of your car in order to improve its performance. Once you start doing jobs, however, the gameplay is entirely different. Jobs are almost always available from a local shop, and if you choose to do one of these jobs, the gameplay becomes much more exciting. You'll use your car to perform missions, gather money and vital materials, fight against enemies, and basically travel all over the continent. In perhaps one of the game's most unique twists, you actually drive between places instead of traveling by foot like in any other typical RPG. There are a lot of routes that connect each location, and you can thoroughly explore every one of them for hidden treasures. Now, when on the road, the car itself is easy to handle, thanks to a simple and intuitive control scheme, with the game automatically selecting and rotating between several weapons based on the situation. When it comes to visuals, Car Battler Joe is pretty decent, with the sprites and portraits of the major characters being well portrayed. On the other hand, cars do have a somewhat simple appearance and are lacking intricate details, but this was obviously done to keep the frame rate at a respectable level. Mode 7 is implemented well, and even though the playing field constantly spins and turns, you'll never lose sight of what is going on. If you're a fan of RPGs but are also fond of racing games, Car Battler Joe would be right up your street. If there is one word that could sum up Kururin, it would have to be strange. First up, that name is a bit of a mouthful, but it's the gameplay that really makes it what it is. Basically, it's a puzzle game that sees you following the story of a young boy who is told by his mother that his brother and sisters have gone missing. You decide to hop into your helicopter and embark across 10 different worlds to save them. But in order to do so, you'll have to get used to the rather unorthodox gameplay. Now, the basic concept is that you're looking down onto a maze and you must get your stick, which is really your helicopter's propeller, from one side of the maze to the other. However, to make it difficult, it is spinning, and you must navigate it as it spins by timing how you approach certain parts of the course. While early levels are relatively straightforward, as you get further through the game, the levels become more complex and harder to move through. On average, it takes about 1 to 2 minutes to get through a level, but for some it could be as long as 5. It all depends on your approach. You'll find several bonuses and power-ups that alter your craft and can make it all the more easier to make it to the finish line, but there is also a challenge mode with 50 mazes, which is short but very difficult, and you've got to complete all 50 to earn a special bonus. Add to this the inclusion of local multiplayer and you'll be hard pressed to run out of things to do. So what can I say? Kururin offers simple fun and very addictive gameplay. It is a true portable game as well, as you can pick up and play wherever you want to. Play for a few minutes and actually achieve and save something instead of having to sit down for hours to work through a large quest. When you first play this game, I doubt you will be impressed, but if you give it a chance and play it for that bit longer, I'm sure you'll enjoy it just as much as I did. Taking a break from Pokemon, Game Freak decided to focus their efforts on a rather unique take on the platforming genre. You control Jill, who is the daughter of a gang of thieves known as the Red Dozer. Her father was seriously injured by a rival gang, whilst he was trying to protect a very special diamond. It's up to Jill and her trusty Drill Dozer robot, as well as her crew, to steal back this diamond. As with many platforming games, the narrative takes a backseat, but for what it's worth, it is very well presented and filled to the brim with colourful characters and villains. Now, on the surface, it seems just like any other basic side-scroller, but the only weapon you can use throughout the game is the aforementioned Drill Dozer robot. You'll use it to drill through enemies, screws, walls, and just about anything that could be considered an obstacle. The adventure is made up of 6 areas with about 11 levels. At first, it does sound quite short, but it does manage to include several collectibles that warrant subsequent playthroughs. On top of this, the levels are not short and involve more than just going from beginning to end. More importantly, the pacing is perfect and the difficulty rises evenly as you play. The bosses are many and soon become one of the best aspects of the game. Each of them are expertly designed and require the player to think on their toes and utilize all of their options. But what truly steals the show is the presentation of Drill Dozer. It absolutely screams quality. The sprite work is impressive, as is the general speed of the gameplay, which can become rather intense. But Drill Dozer goes even further in trying to immerse the player, with the game cartridge providing a vibration feature which corresponds with the gameplay. If you never got around to it back in the day, Drill Dozer is definitely something that's worth checking out. The Game Boy Advance was home to an incredible amount of racing games. From the realistic like GT Advance to the more casual like Mario Kart, there was something for everyone. But one game that flew well under the radar for many was Penny Racers. It embraced the cute and colourful nature of party racing games, but mixed it with an in-depth system that boasted an insane amount of customization that any fan of the sport would enjoy. There's over 150 different parts that you can use to customize all aspects of your car, from acceleration, top speed, to handling and road grip, and later in the game even an option to add weapons to your vehicle for an extra advantage. Now, without a good selection of tracks to race on, all of this would mean nothing. Thankfully, Penny Racers consists of just over 50 different courses for the player to tackle, and after you complete each of them, you're awarded a certain amount of money depending on your performance, which can then be spent upon all of the different parts I mentioned earlier to further enhance your ride. The best thing about it is that all of the changes you make are completely noticeable once out on the track, which provides a real sense of progression as you make your way through the career. On top of this is the sheer amount of things to do once you've actually completed the career mode. You can collect every part, play races with computer opponents, play a multi-link race with up to 4 different players, as well as just simply playing through the career again. If you've exhausted the other racing options on the GBA, Penny Racers would make a welcome addition to your collection. After a somewhat troublesome first outing, CT Special Forces made a return to set the record straight, gone with the rather archaic decisions that held back the original, and in its place an experience that emulated its clear inspiration that bit more. It's no surprise that many have compared it to Metal Slug, and I'd have to agree with them, as just like that game, it's a 2D shooter that sees you travelling through a wide range of levels and taking out as many enemies as you can. Thankfully, there's a distinct amount of challenge present though, which forces the player to apply various tactics throughout its runtime. For one, there is a bigger variety of enemies, snipers shooting from elevated positions, or grunts with miniguns that track you down. Of course, at the beginning you'll have a basic gun, but soon come across a wide variety of weaponry which can be used at any time, and as you would expect, you'll find yourself encountering several bosses who are all hell-bent on stopping you dead in your tracks. One thing that has made this otherwise unknown game somewhat known is its visuals, mainly because it bears a strong resemblance to the more popular Metal Slug series. The cartoonish theme with its bright and lush colours light up the screen and bring a real sense of action to the gameplay. There are a few small but vast improvements over the first game, such as better special effects and explosions, more varied backgrounds, as well as fluid animations and a higher resolution, which all complement the game as a whole. If you're on the lookout for something easy to pick up and play in short bursts, CT Special Forces 2 would be a solid option. Jet Set Radio is a mixture of extreme sports, action and graffiti. It all began on the Sega Dreamcast with the first release and would make an appearance on Nintendo's handheld, which would mark the only new game in the series to date. You take up the role of Beat and set out across Tokyo to protect your turf from rival gangs. Along the way you challenge other taggers, and if you prove worthy, they actually join your gang, so you get the option to control them and take advantage of their extra speed and tricks. The entire town is split up into 3 parts. To the west is the noise tanks, which are essentially high-tech taggers that use a lot of technology. To the east is the Poison Jam, a twisted bunch of perverts with crazy masks. And to the south is the main characters group, the GGs. It's basically a freeway standoff until the police come in with tanks, helicopters and soldiers, with an underground radio station sending out information about the fight and playing some snazzy beats to keep you going. As for the actual gameplay, it takes place from an isometric viewpoint, very much like the Tony Hawk handheld outing. The controls can take a while to get used to, but when you do, it's practically flawless. Now, as I mentioned, graffiti is one of the core pillars of the game, and it sees you coming across spots in the world which can be tagged. A series of D-pad commands appear on screen as you decide to leave your mark, which eventually has you performing a variety of them, including clockwise and counterclockwise motions to complete your masterpiece. There's even a pretty cool feature that allows the player to customize their own graffiti, which works very well, but can be somewhat difficult to make due to the small screen. If you enjoyed it on the Dreamcast and are also a fan of the Tony Hawk Gameboy Advance ports, Jet Set Radio is well worth a shot. Now, one game that often gets overlooked is the sequel to one of the best RPGs on the Game Boy Advance. Summon Night Swordcraft Story 2 is very similar to the first game, and it's almost more of a redux than a sequel. Don't get me wrong, there is a new quest, all new characters, new summon beasts, and all new areas to explore, but the core gameplay is very reminiscent. Summon Night 2 takes place in the same land, but the story focuses on a different village, with you having the option to play through the entire game as either Edgar or Aria. It sees you setting off to try and seal a great beast, and to ultimately bring peace back to the village. Right at the beginning, you also get to choose a guardian beast, which basically acts as your magic support during battle, and it's not long before you're exploring dungeons and various areas and running into enemies, where the game breaks away to side-scrolling battles where you have free control over your character. During these encounters, you can switch between 3 weapons that you have equipped and summon your guardian beast to cast spells. It's very reminiscent of the Tales series, and if I'm being honest, the combat system is hands down the best aspect of the entire game. But coming in a close second, however, is the intricate crafting system that's in place. Prior to venturing into dungeons, you'll have the ability to craft various weapons and items from all of the various materials you may find littered across each location. From swords to axes and hammers, there's a staggering amount of combinations, which really make digging into this aspect of the game one of the most rewarding. Summon Knight's Swordcraft Story 2 is without doubt one of the most enjoyable Game Boy Advance games I've ever played, and I think that anyone who enjoys RPGs will feel the same way. The gameplay is top notch, the narrative will have you in stitches, and the crafting system will cause you to search around like a madman for crafting materials. If you find it, pick it up. Lady Sia follows the story of a woman whose country has been taken over by a race of creatures called the Tussaud. These creatures have seized control of everything from the ports to the temples, but thanks to a mysterious cloaked figure, Sia has managed to escape the clutches of the enemy and now seeks to unleash her rage upon them. It's essentially an action platformer with Sia's main method of attack being her sword. You've got several different slashes and chops as well as a string of combinations to perform. You can also shoot bolts of energy from the sword by holding down the attack button, as well as having limited access to magic, but I found that there's only a few occasions where you'll actually use it. Casting a spell involves a combination of the D-pad and hitting a face button, which at first can be a bit tricky to pull off, but after some time with the game, it all becomes second nature. The adventure spans 4 main areas with numerous sub-levels, each rendered in gorgeous watercolored styled visuals. Lady Sia is a game that takes full advantage of the Game Boy Advance's hardware and boasts highly detailed backgrounds and characters, independently scrolling backgrounds and foregrounds, and even several scaling and rotating effects. The watercolor style presents a clarity and lightness that works very well on the Game Boy Advance screen, and generally darkness is not an issue except on 1 or 2 levels that take place at night. Overall, Lady Sia is a game I can easily recommend you try out. From its compelling gameplay to its unique and intoxicating presentation, it is well worth a shot. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, as well as join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Quinn, Dio, Alex, Simon and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon, you'll find all of these links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll see you in the next one.